For over 10 years, my gold-digging wife drained me completely, so I finally reached my breaking point and filed for divorce. She responded by harassing and stalking me, leaving me no choice but to take drastic action. Here's the backstory. Along with a few updates when we were getting married, something in my gut warned me against it, but she pressured me until I gave in. The moment our marriage license was signed, things started falling apart. Just a few months in, she secretly took out most of my savings to put down a deposit on an expensive apartment that I never wanted. When I found out and rightfully got upset, she told me I was just her provider, and I needed to accept that her word outweighed mine. I remember surprising her with a Michael Kors handbag, only for her to complain that it didn't match her phone case. I'm a doctor and make a good living, yet I have less than $2,000 in savings. We've lost all intimacy. We don't laugh or talk about anything other than money. We have no kids. She wanted them before we got married, but later changed her mind. Our home is cold and devoid of any joy. I hate the house, and I hate her. I've rented an apartment across town, and there's already a stack of IKEA furniture waiting for me there. The lease on the Mercedes she forced me to lease is expiring, and I'm replacing it with a used Prius. Tomorrow, I'll tell her I want a divorce. I know she'll cry and beg for therapy, but I don't want it. This marriage was never right, and I regret taking this long to see it. Update 1: usually I wake up and go for a run or a bike ride while my wife gets ready for the day. But this morning, I stayed in the kitchen, pacing as I rehearsed what I needed to say. When she finally came downstairs, I felt oddly calm. I wasn't panicked, but rather at peace. I told her we needed to talk, and she barely looked up from the coffee machine. Without much hesitation, I told her I was leaving and wanted a divorce. I explained that we hadn't been happy for a long time, and I felt like she didn't care about me or my emotional needs. Instantly, the gaslighting began. She cried that I didn't bring her flowers anymore, that I wasn't supporting her enough, and that I didn't care about her happiness. I reminded her that I had suggested therapy over a year ago, but she made excuse after excuse to avoid it. I brought up her reckless spending despite our budget and told her how it made me feel when she dismissed my feelings. The crying and begging escalated. She promised she'd go to therapy and try harder. But I felt nothing. Whatever feelings I had for her were dead. It felt like I was talking to a distant relative, not my wife. I eventually got fed up and left. Now she's blowing up my phone with calls and texts that range from anger to begging to threats. Her mother and mine have also started calling. By the end of the day, I spoke briefly to my mother and explained that my wife was draining me both financially and emotionally, and I couldn't continue. Surprisingly, my mother was supportive. I'm currently in my new apartment. I rolled out the mattress in a box, went to Walmart for sheets, ate Thai takeout at the kitchen counter, and watched Netflix on my laptop. I have everything I need for the next few days, and tomorrow my wife will be served with divorce papers. I keep expecting to feel sadness, but it hasn't hit. I feel like a huge weight has been lifted from my shoulders, and for the first time, my future feels full of possibilities. I plan to travel, try new restaurants, and take a job that brings me pride instead of just wealth. And much to the internet's dismay, I'm going to ask out the barista who's been flirting with me. She's age appropriate, it's her family's business, and I can tell the difference between customer service and genuine connection. Cheers to a new chapter. Tonight I'm having a beer and going for a walk around my new neighborhood. Update 2: I woke up in my new apartment and immediately felt like I had more space to breathe. The sunlight streaming through the window didn't bring the familiar sense of dread that I used to feel. I threw on jeans and a t-shirt and decided to visit the little cafe around the corner, the one with the wooden tables outside and big glass windows. I thought it'd be nice to have breakfast there and maybe see if the barista was working. When I walked in, the warm and comforting smell of fresh coffee welcomed me, and I felt at peace for the first time in years. I spotted the barista right away. Her name tag said Amy, and she smiled at me like she always did. I stood in line, ordered a muffin and coffee, and sat down. A few minutes later, I heard a familiar voice. I turned around, and there she was, my wife. She looked furious, her eyes red like she'd been crying all night, and her hair was a mess. People in the cafe were staring at her, and my heart sank. This wasn't going to end well. "There you are," she yelled, marching straight up to me. "I've been looking for you everywhere." "Amanda, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I noticed Amy glance over, her smile fading as she handed a drink to another customer. "What am I doing here?" she shouted. "I should be asking you that. You left me, and now you're just out here getting coffee like nothing happened?" People were definitely staring now. I felt embarrassed and angry at the same time. I didn't want to do this here, not in front of everyone, and especially not in front of Amy. "Amanda, I'm just getting a coffee," I said, trying to keep my voice low. "Can we talk about this later?" "No, we can't talk about this later," she yelled, even louder. "You're my husband. You're supposed to be at home with me, not here flirting with some barista like a creep." I glanced at Amy, who looked uncomfortable. I wanted to crawl into a hole. "Amanda, stop," I said, still trying to keep calm. "I'm not doing this right now." "Oh, you're not doing this right now?" She mocked, crossing her arms. "Well, too bad, because I am doing this right now. You owe me an explanation, and you're going to give it to me." I looked around the cafe. Everyone was watching, their eyes on us, and it made my skin crawl. I just wanted to get out of there. "I'm not going back with you," I said firmly. "I'm done." Her face twisted with anger. "You think you're done? You don't get to just leave me like this." She grabbed my arm, trying to pull me toward the door. "You're coming home, and we're going to fix this." I pulled my arm away. "No, I'm not," I said, my voice steady. "It's over, Amanda. I'm not coming back." She looked like she was going to explode. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "You're nothing without me, you hear me? Nothing." I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving my coffee and muffin behind. I heard her footsteps behind me, and I knew she wasn't going to give up easily. I made my way to my car, and she was still right behind me, yelling. "Get in your car and go home," I said, turning to face her. "You're making a scene." "I don't care," she screamed. "You're my husband. You're supposed to be with me." "I'm not your anything anymore," I said, opening my car door. "Just go." I got in the car and started the engine. She was still standing there, her face twisted with anger and hurt. I backed out of the parking spot and drove off, but I saw in my rearview mirror that she was getting into her car too. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I couldn't go back to my apartment if she was following me. I needed to lose her. I drove through a few side streets trying to think. I could still see her car not far behind me. My heart was pounding and my hands were sweaty on the steering wheel. I took a sharp left and sped up a bit, hoping she wouldn't keep up. After a few minutes, her car was nowhere in sight. I took a few more turns just to be safe and finally made my way back to my new apartment. My hands were shaking as I parked and got out. I hurried up the stairs and locked the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath. I felt drained. This was just the beginning, I knew that, but I also knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I didn't feel guilty or sad, just relieved. I was free. Update 3: after I managed to lose her that day, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd give up and let it go. But I was wrong. It didn't take her long to figure out where I was living. I'm not sure how she did it. Maybe she followed me one day without me noticing, or perhaps she asked around but she found my new address. The first sign was a pile of mail on my doorstep when I came home from work a few days later. There were bills and random advertisements, all addressed to Amanda McCoy. She had forwarded her mail to my new place. At first, I thought it was some kind of mix-up at the post office, so I called her to ask why her mail was coming to my apartment. She laughed and said, "Oh, I just thought it would be easier for you to pay my bills if they came straight to you." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. I hung up and blocked her number, but the mail kept coming. It was her way of letting me know that she knew where I lived. Then one night I came home to find her sitting on the steps outside my building. I tried to walk past her, but she stood up and blocked my way. "You think you can just leave me?" she said, her voice cold and low. "You think you can just move on like I don't exist?" "I'm not doing this, Amanda." "Go home," I said, trying to stay calm. "This is my home," she snapped. "I'm your wife. You don't get to run away from me." I pushed past her, and she started screaming, calling me every name in the book. Neighbors peeked out of their windows as she made a scene, just like she had at the cafe. I went inside, locked the door, and my hands were shaking. She pounded on the door for what felt like hours, shouting that I owed her, that I had ruined her life. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. They told me to get a restraining order, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for that step. I just hoped she would calm down once the divorce proceedings started. But things only got worse. During mediation, every meeting turned into a shouting match. She would show up late, disheveled and angry. She interrupted me, called me names, and accused me of being abusive, of cheating, of everything horrible you could imagine. At one point, during a particularly nasty session, she leaned over the table and said, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about that night in Mexico. Do you remember when you got drunk and hit me?" I was stunned. I had never laid a hand on her. "What the hell are you talking about, Amanda?" I said, my voice shaking. "Oh, you don't remember? How convenient," she replied, turning to the mediator with a sweet smile. "He has a history of violence. I just don't feel safe." The mediator looked uncomfortable, and I felt like I was in a nightmare. She was lying, outright lying, and there was nothing I could do to prove otherwise. I realized then that she wasn't going to let this go. It wasn't about the money or the apartment, it was about control. She couldn't stand that I was taking any of it back. The worst part was when she started showing up at my job. I work at a hospital, and she came in pretending to be a patient, making a scene in the waiting room until security had to escort her out. She called my boss, telling him I was mentally unstable, that I was abusing drugs, and that I was a danger to my patients. None of it was true, but it was humiliating, and I could tell people were starting to talk. Eventually, my boss called me in, concerned. He was kind, but he said I needed to get things under control. I knew he was right. The final straw came after the divorce was finalized. I thought things would calm down once the papers were signed, but I was wrong again. One night, I came home late and saw her car parked outside my building. She was just sitting there, staring up at my window. I tried to ignore it, went inside, and shut the blinds. But it kept happening every night. She'd be there, just sitting in her car, watching. Then one night, I came home and didn't see her car. I felt a brief sense of relief, maybe she had finally given up. But when I opened my door, she was sitting on my couch. I froze, my heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. She stood up, a slow, eerie smile spreading across her face. "I still have a key, remember? I had forgotten to change the lock, stupid mistake." I backed up toward the door, ready to call the police.